Appreciate Auditor Mike Harmon.
Thank you. Thank you. How's everybody doing today?
Great.
Well, I had an opportunity to visit with several of you on the way up. I certainly enjoy the opportunity to come and speak with you. And everybody that knows me knows that I usually like to start with something funny. So, and my apologies, this one is pseudo related to food, but so my apologies on that. But basically there was this fella that traveled the world, and all of a sudden he stumbles into a cannibal bar. He thought this was the craziest thing, a cannibal bar. So he kind of goes up and he's sitting there looking, and you know, it's they've kind of got the chalkboard. Do you ever see the chalkboard where they got the pricing kind of like a coffee shop? Well, they had the $10 minister, they had $25 teacher, $50 construction worker, and right down at the very bottom they had politician, $125. I thought that was the craziest thing. So he waves the guy over and says, what is the deal with this? You know, why is, you've got a minister that's 10, why is a politician 125? And the guy leans over and said, you ever try to clean one of them things? So, I'm sorry. Now, I'm sorry. But anyway, I don't know how many politicians we've cleaned in the auditor's office, but that's not exactly. Thankfully, we don't have any politicians here today. We have statesmen and stateswomen here today, as opposed to politicians. So, yes. But those, as I said, I graduated. Kind of give you additional background. Of course, I graduated at Val Victoria, Boyle County High School. Went on to Eastern Kentucky University, where I graduated with a triple major in math, statistics, and theater. I jokingly tell everybody that way I know the math, I know the stats. When I don't know, I just act like I know. So if that is a joke, by the way. I did, as indicated earlier, I served 13 years in the Kentucky House of Representatives in the 54th House District, which was primarily Boyle and Washington most of the time, and right there at the end after redistricting, probably for about the last 2 years, Boyle and Casey. It was an honor to serve certainly there. And it's been an honor to serve as your Kentucky State Auditor as well. And the very first thing I did when I went into the office is I told all our auditors, we don't target anyone, we don't give anybody a pass, we just simply follow the data. I felt that was important. You know, I feel like data is nonpartisan, and that's where the, you know, obviously the auditor's office should be, both independent and nonpartisan. And we've stayed pretty busy. We do roughly 500-600 audits per year. We do everything, as I talked to several of y'all, county clerks, we audit county clerks and sheriffs and the fiscal courts, and we stay pretty busy in that regards. In addition to those, we also do what's known as special exams. And you know, one of the very first special exams we did when we entered was a special exam on the CLEP Fund, Kentucky Law Enforcement Foundation Program Fund, just to help us ensure the taxpayer dollars that are intended for police and fire actually end up with police and fire. We did a special exam, a governance exam of the University of Louisville Foundation and the University of Louisville, where among findings that we found was the college, or the university had actually lent $67 million to the foundation as opposed to the other way around. Of course, foundations are supposed to help advance the college as opposed, or the university as opposed to the other. And then one of the things we also found was, you know, a $1 billion organization in the foundation did not have budget to actuals. And I jokingly tell everybody that you know, I'm church moderator. Well, I actually am church moderator at our church, but our church is not nearly as big as a $1 billion organization, but we have budget to actuals. And so, thankfully, the university has used our special exam to help get them back on track. We appreciate their from the standpoint of utilizing that. We also did the very first audit of AOC. Now, I jokingly say that's not the interesting young lady in Washington, D.C., but the administrative offices of the courts, where among findings we found that, of course, I was very thankful. Chief Justice invited us in. and we had 20 findings, but one of the ones we found, they had actually leased space for one of the justices from a company that just happened to be owned by his 2 sons and just happened to be 3 times higher than the next closest bid. So, and thankfully, you know, they have, the Administrative Office of Courts have embraced several of our recommendations. They didn't embrace all of them, but they have embraced several of our recommendations. So we certainly appreciate that. A lot of you may have seen the most recent special exam we did, which was a special examination of Senate Bill 2 compliance, Senate Bill 2 being the most recent bill for, it was actually passed in 2017, for transparency, greater transparency in our retirement systems. And in that particular one that we just released, and actually we testified earlier this week in front of the Public Pension Oversight Board, which by the way is the auditor actually sat on, trying to ensure that you know, our retirement systems get them in the right track. Well, from a transparency standpoint and in compliance with Senate Bill 2, they were not adhering to the requirements of Senate Bill 2. There was a requirement in Senate Bill 2 for them to post contracts. Now, they can and should, if there are certain items, they are allowed to redact certain items, but they are supposed to be the ones to do it. And unfortunately, both KTRS and KRS had failed to post 80% plus of their contracts. We had some concerns. KRS had sent us multiple numbers, so that created another concern as to whether or not they were properly tracking the number of contracts that they had. But whether you used any of those numbers that KRS provided us, they were not posting at least 80% of their contracts. With KRS, it was interesting because with KRS, they were actually allowing the investment managers to redact as opposed to themselves. They didn't require the investment managers to give any detail as to why they were redacting. And then in addition, they were not challenging anything that they might. Now, there was maybe one contract that they kind of halfway challenged one of them. And they must have not done very well with it because they still haven't posted it. So anyway, but the ballpark, bullet down, they weren't posting at least 80% of the contracts. So we kind of equated to the, you know, a batter coming up to the plate and being allowed to call his own balls and own strikes. You know, so it's kind of along that way. Now KTRS, on the other hand, they also had at least 80% of their contracts that they had not posted. They did have a process in place, and they did have the investment managers redacting, and they did have them you know, basically give explanations as to why they were redacting certain information. However, KTRS was actually redacting more than what even the investment managers were requiring them to do, which was certainly not in the spirit of greater transparency in that regard. The other thing that KTRS was doing was that there is a requirement for the fees that are being charged by the investment managers to be listed. And on this particular case, KRS was doing it correctly. KTRS, however, specifically on something called carried interest, which is basically a profit sharing type thing with the investment managers. Most investment managers will have like a flat fee, but then some of them also have, if they, you know, kind of a performance-based profit sharing, if they get a percentage of it. Well, they were supposed to report those fees, but KTRS was not reporting those particular fees. They were reporting it as net as opposed to gross, then the fees and the net, which is kind of interesting because I sat on Public Pension Oversight, and for years and years and years they have told us about how well they have the smallest fees, but if you don't include all the fees, then that's probably part of it. Now, both KTRS and KRS kind of pushed back a little bit. They said they had a 2016 Attorney General opinion, and then where there were certain things they weren't required to post, and then we kind of pointed out, well, Senate Bill 2 was 2017, so you might want to go back and have them check this again to see if that is still in fact the case. But we stay pretty busy. You know, in addition to our special exams, we like to be, and hopefully we have been, we like to be as much of a resource to our local officials as we can, without impairing our ability to audit. I mean, we At least I think it's every year, but it's not every year. Most years we have had what we call our county auditor conference, where we invite our officials in and we try to provide them with additional training. We encourage people, if they have questions of our auditors, to ask, but we still have to be a little careful to make sure we don't do anything that impairs. DLG, I think, does a reasonably decent job, but sometimes there's holes there that we try to fill the best of our place. And the other thing we do is, with everybody struggling currently with pension costs, and other costs, but pension costs specifically, some areas are struggling because, coal went, down, and so there was a lot of coal severance that they were depending on in that regards. But most people are struggling even more because of the public pension. Anyway, long story short, and just kind of a sidebar, the other thing that we do before I finish that one up, we also like to do what we call our data bulletins, and one of the data bulletins that we did was a debt data bulletin, where we showed the state was basically $54.8 billion in debt. And that's just the state. That doesn't count the counties and everything. Unfortunately, 80% of that was the unfunded pension liability. So if you take the $54.8 billion divided by every man, woman, and child in the state of Kentucky, that's about $12,300 for every man, woman, and child in the state of Kentucky. Now, why do I say that's important for us to know? Well, our states, our taxpayers, and even our pension plans, the individuals who have fought for, have worked for these pensions, it's something for us to make sure we have grasp. But getting back to the original, where I kind of take a little sidebar there, we want to work with our officials. So since I had 13 years in the Kentucky General Assembly, some of you all know my General Counsel, Sarah Beth Gregory, who had 2 years in the House and the 2 years in the Senate. We've been able to advance several pieces of good legislation to help the state and counties be efficient, effective, and more ethical. Not that you all yourself weren't, but efficient, effective, and ethical. And one of those things was Senate Bill 144, that basically allowed that if your county clerk or your sheriff had a clean audit the year before, then you could apply for an AUP, agreed upon procedure. Now, why is that important? It's important for a couple of reasons. One, a lot of people, now I know you all do, but a lot of people don't realize that we charge for our audits. It's just, it's just a fact that it's, part of the process of how we fund the work that we do, which I think we do great work. But by using AUP instead of a full-blown financial statement audit, we originally estimated it was going to save about 25 to 50% on the cost of the audit. We're rolling some of these out the door now, and we're actually finding that in many cases it's 50% plus. So that's going to be good. That money will eventually end up with the savings to hopefully help your counties out as well. So as much as we can do to be a resource on that, we want to be, to the best of our ability. Now, the other thing I will tell you, as I said, it's been an honor to serve, but I've also enjoyed traveling the state and meeting so many people, and it has been an honor to serve. But I met one lady, and of course some of you know the story to a little bit, but I ended up traveling back from Pikeville, I don't know, 5-6 months ago, maybe a little bit longer, and ended up going through McGoffin, and I ended up getting diverted away from a mudslide right into high water. So I won't go into the full story, but basically I lost my card, and I ended up in like a rescue area. And of course, everywhere I went, even though it was kind of rough, and I was like, "Hi, I'm Mike Harmon, Kentucky State Auditor, Mike Harmon, Kentucky." Well, this one lady, one guy says, "Hey, I want you to meet my wife." So he brings me over, and he says, "Listen, Mike, this is my wife." Saying, "Hi, I'm Mike Harmon, Kentucky State Auditor." Well, she says, "Mike Harmon, Mike Harmon. We got a Mike Harmon here." And I said, "You do?" She said, "Yeah, but he's a mortician." And I said, "Well, that's where we differ. Everybody's dying to see him. No one's dying to see the auditor." So hopefully that's not true of you all, where you don't want to see the auditor. But we certainly try to do everything professionally, but we also want to try to put a little bit of humor in it, because when you start talking about numbers and figures and facts, sometimes people, I don't want to say everybody glazes over, but you know, sometimes it's not as enthusiastic as talking about other things, but it's just as important. It's just as important, and as I said, we want to be a resource. Certainly would be open to any questions if anybody has any questions. Or now, either I did a really great job or I did such a terrible job that you're not really sure. Well, yes.
Mike, was your office, do you all audit our pension, our retirement plan?
Yes, that she asked, do we audit? Okay. Much like our fiscal courts, our fiscal courts, we actually have the right of first refusal to audit the fiscal courts every year, but a lot of times if they will request a CPA, a lot of times we will authorize that. We'd like to make sure we do the fiscal courts at least once every 4, if not every 5. But now for the pensions, each of the pension systems require, we as the auditor's office are required once every 5 years to do a financial statement audit of the pension systems. So like last year we did KRS, this year we're in the middle of doing KTRS. So yes, we do audit. Now what we just released was not the financial statement audit. What we just released was a special exam of Senate Bill 2 compliance, as well as some other things. We jokingly said, I forgot to say, but when we released the special exam on Senate Bill 2 and others, most of that was probably I hit the highlights, but one of the findings we had was we jokingly said we pay dead people. So you kind of like the old Sixth Sense, I see dead people. Well, we pay dead people. So I think KRS had paid about $12,000 or a little bit more out to dead people for benefits beyond when they should have got it. JFRS was a little bit less, about $1,300. KTRS, I think, did probably a better job of that, and they've tried to recoup some of that. But you know, $12,000 in a billions of dollars doesn't sound like a whole lot, but in a situation where, especially KERS, which is one of the 5 funds under KRS or KERS non-hazardous, is only about 12–13% funded. You know, it's every little dollar helps. But yes, we do. We do a financial statement audit once every 5 years of each of the retirement systems. And it's kind of interesting that, you know, we have 3 major retirement systems. Of course, we have KRS, which under KRS you have KERS, non-hazardous, you have KERS hazardous, you have CERS, which, you know, is most of people here who's in the county, CERS non-hazardous, CERS hazardous, and then you have your state police under the umbrella of KRS. KTRS obviously is your teacher's retirement, and then JFRS is your judicial and your legislator retirement. So there are 3 major, but then there's those majors are umbrellas over some others as well.
So in your opinion, how secure, what direction is our retirement plans going in?
Well, we've got a long way to go. You know, KRS, which obviously is the county, you know, we just got to talking about the county and the state. Both KRS and KTRS have a long way to go. KRS obviously is in a greater situation than KERS and KERS non-hazardous. I will say probably over the last 3.5 years, we're finally fully funding the pension ARC, which is turning the ship around, and we're doing it with better data. You know, for so many years, we had assumptions. We had assumptions that were poor assumptions, and we weren't even fully funding to the poor assumptions. Now we have better assumptions, and we're fully funding to the better assumptions. Now, why do I say that's important? Well, unlike KERS and KERS non-hazardous, the state was not fully funding those ARC assumptions, which is the actuarial required calculations. CERS was, and yet they're still 55–60% funded. So if we'd had better assumptions and you all fully funded to those, then you would be either fully funded or a lot closer. And most of y'all, I assume y'all know how the pension works, but just in case, you know, when an employee starts in a defined benefit, it's a little bit different for those that are Tier 3 now, but when an employee starts in a defined benefit plan, basically they put in so much of their check, and it varies depending on what system. KTRS puts in a little bit more, but they also don't have Social Security or have access to Social Security. But you know, the employee puts in a little bit, the employer, being whether the state or county, puts in a little bit, and then you have these actuaries that figure, okay, we're going to assume we're going to make X amount of rate, we're going to assume we're going to have X amount of payroll growth. And really for me, I think the payroll growth is really where they made their mistake. Because anytime I base a retirement not just on what you earn, but what you earn and what you earn and what you earn, I think we're going to have a problem. And we haven't had for the longest time KRS, and I guess to a certain degree KTRS too, utilized a 4% payroll growth, and of course we haven't had a 4% payroll growth in years. But anyway, so you've got the employer puts in, the employee puts in, and then you have this assumed rate of return based on several factors. Well, if they ever so often, they will take a look at that and say, how close to target are we to hitting that? Well, if they're off, then they have another amount that the state or the employer puts in. The employee doesn't have to put it in, but the employer has to put in, called the ARC, which is the actuarial required calculation. Now those first two, neither the state, the teachers, counties, no one's missed those first two. The employees always put in theirs, the employer has always put in that initial, but what hasn't always been put in is that ARC, that actuarial required. I always kind of call it the, oh my, we made a mistake portion. So we are finally having better data. And when it comes, we're using a lower assumed rate, we're using a much lower assumed payroll growth, and which makes the payment to those even higher, and we are fully funding to those over the last three and a half years. We are fully funding to those, which means we're hit it back in the right direction, but it's kind of like I describe it, it's kind of like the ship got away from the dock. We finally got the ship turned, it's heading back towards the dock, but we're still about 30 years out to get them healthy again. And it's important. It's important for all of them, but it's really important for the teachers because teachers, they don't pay Social Security, but they also can't, most of them can't draw Social Security, and most of them can't draw Social Security of a deceased spouse. It's just the way that it was set up. So it's imperative for those to survive. And I think they will. I think there will have to be additional tweaks. I don't think those tweaks should be imposed on those previously, just those going forward. And then of course the other one we had since I was in the, it applied most of KRS and CERS, it didn't apply to the teachers. But when I was in the House in 2013, we passed legislation that beginning January 1st, 2014, most new employees beyond there, if you hadn't been in the system previously, are under what they call Tier 3, which basically what that is the employer puts in so much, the employee puts in so much, and then the employer guarantees that they will have a rate of return of at least 4%. If it's below 4%, then the employer guarantees the difference. If it's above 4%, then the employer shares in 1/4 of the rate above that 4%. The employee still gets 3/4 of the rate. Kind of compared, it's a little bit better than this, but I can almost compare it to a, I don't know if anybody worked in banking or insurance or whatever, but I kind of compare it to a fixed annuity where you have a guaranteed rate of return, but you don't really participate as much in the gains, but you also don't get hit by the losses. So I don't know if that answered your question. We've got a long ways to go, but we're heading in the right direction, if that makes any sense.
So Mike, you mentioned the 54 billion debt.
54.8 billion, yes.
Okay, and then
about 80% of that's the unfunded pension liability.
Okay, now is that money that the state hasn't put in, or is it partially that and partially what? See, I tell you, everybody thinks there's a silver bullet to fix the pension system.
there wasn't one thing that got us there, and there's not one thing that's going to get us out. Part of the unfunded pension, which is, like I said, 80% of that, part of it's for like KERS, part of it's because they didn't fully fund the pension ARC. For CERS and some of the others, it's because the assumptions were wrong. I remember sitting, and this was probably, I want to say 2012, 2011, but I remember sitting in a committee, and Bo Barnes, who does a great job, but you know, he heads up like the investment, I think he's the executive director of his title, whatever, but of the teachers' retirement. And I remember Bo sitting before us and talking about how if the teachers' retirement was 100% funded, and we hit the rate of return, which at that time I think they were using 7.5. If they hit the assumed rate of return at 7.5, you would never have to put in that extra. You would just have to put in, you know, what Eastern put in. And I had to like, Bo, because this occurred in the exact same, I mean, just previously. So I raised my hand like, Bo, you just got through telling us, you just told us that 10 years ago you were 100% funded. And over the period of these last 10 years, you made not 7.5, but 7.6 return on investment. And yet here we are at whatever we were, 55, 60% at that time. It's a little bit lower now, but well, a little bit higher, but still 55, 60% give or take. I was like, Bo, what's going on? And he said, well, he said back then we were heavily invested in tech stock, and when the tech bubble burst, it was problematic. He said in reality, even though we reported we were 100%, it was really just 100% on paper. In reality, we were probably at about 77% funded. And I'm like, well, tell people that. Tell people that, because you got people out there talking about, you know, all the problems, which it is, but every group wants to point a finger at somebody else as to what the problem is, and we've got to quit pointing fingers, and we've got to look at the solutions, and we've got to make sure that we act on those solutions. Because it's important to the people that have worked for and earned this and expected and planned their entire life around it. I mean, how would you like it if you planned your whole life, you for whatever reason, you failed to put additional aside, and then one day you wake up and it's not there? I mean, that's not a good feeling. So it's important to them. It's important to the taxpayers for transparency, because they're the taxpayers are the people that are filling the holes that from the mistakes that were made. So it's important for everybody. So we've just got to make sure we do the right thing. And as I said, I have to have a follow the data attitude, and that's why it's important for our people to have a follow the data attitude, because that's the only way we're going to get in. We got to take emotion out of it, and we just got to follow the data. Other questions? Yes.
Mike, you're talking about follow the data. Are there other special projects you see on the right of the auditor's office, areas where you think greater financial accountability is needed?
We're always looking.
Been done in the past.
You know, we're always looking at different areas. You know, we were, as I said, we were the first to audit a third of the branch of state government in AOC. We were the first one to do the CLEP fund. Certainly, a lot of times what we do is sometimes it's because the secretary asks us, or you know, legislators ask us. Sometimes it's like tips of waste, fraud, or abuse. Some areas it's because just because we feel like it needs to be done because it's never been done, or sometimes even if it's been done, you know, you need to do it again or do it on a regular time frame. So it just depends. We're always working on something. I don't have anything in specific to tell you right now, but certainly if you all have certain concerns, or if you have tips of waste, fraud, or abuse, of course you can go to auditor.ky.gov, or you can call 1-800-KY-ALERT if you have specific tips of waste, fraud, or abuse. But if you just got something that you know, like, man, it might be a good idea for us to take a look at, you know, give me a holler, let me know, and we'll take a look at it. I can't guarantee we'll definitely do it, but anything we can get on our radar, the better off we'll be. I know right after I got there, everybody wanted everything audited. I mean, everything. And so we would love to audit everything, but we also have to be good stewards of our resources. We have to prioritize, just like any other county official has to prioritize what is the most important thing. But that's a good question. Anybody else? Anybody else? Well, that's all right. I'll answer questions all day. All right. Well, thank you all so very much. I appreciate you. Thank you, and God bless.